Hello everyone, my name is Kayla Smith and this is Project A. My presentation will be focused on the virtual environment of garden cemeteries. For as long as we have existed, humans have needed designated spaces for the remains of life. From unmarked graves to elaborate tombs, cemeteries play an integral part in many cultures. However, for this project, I wanted to specifically study the virtual environment of garden cemeteries from the 18th and 19th centuries. For examples, I will be discussing the Père Lachaise Cemetery from Paris, France, both the Laurel Grove and Colonial Park cemeteries in Savannah, Georgia, and the Oakland Cemetery located in Atlanta, Georgia. Using architecture, planning elements, and symbology, garden cemeteries provide us an example of effective heterotopias and teleological spaces. Although we've all seen and probably been in a cemetery or two, how they function can vary. Within a cemetery, there may be several types of grave markers, from a ledger or flat marker to a full-sized family vault. Most cemeteries feature ground burials as the most prevalent type of resting place, but they can also include columbariums, which house ashes, and mausoleums, which may hold either. The difference in monuments may come down to preference, wealth, or cultural practices. From the ancient pyramids of Egypt to more conservative burial sites seen today, cemeteries serve as a destination for the dead as well as a place of reflection and remembrance for the ones left behind. They act as time capsules and museums for learning from a place and its time. By looking at specific garden cemeteries chosen for this presentation, we can understand these teleological spaces at the height of their popularity. To begin our analysis of the three cemeteries, it is important to note how they fall under Michel Foucault's theory of heterotopias. As you may remember from Unit 5, there are two types, crisis and deviation heterotopias, and 5 other aspects of Foucault's theory. These are listed on the screen now. Although not all are required for application of his theory, they do all fit well in helping one define a cemetery space. A few that are most useful here are the elements of time and ritual. With the nature of cemeteries, they are home to many rituals on how the dead are interred as well as how the living are able to interact with the space. One may think of long processions of cars seen while driving, or the more elaborate parades like those seen in New Orleans. There is typically a service held at the site after the funeral parlor. Afterwards, families and friends may visit and leave flowers, pictures, shells, etc. Some cultures even have national holidays of remembrance, such as Latin cultures with the Day of the Dead and their French counterpart, La Toussaint, of which I was able to view while in Lacoste and have included some personal photos of the village's cemetery here. In defining garden cemeteries as either a crisis or deviation heterotopia, noting which function of the cemetery is crucial. As a place of rest, I believe this could be considered deviation as the deceased are experiencing the most extreme conflict to everyday life. However, as a visitor, garden cemeteries allow relief from the day-to-day and a safe place to experience grief. So even though all aspects of Foucault's theory can be applied, an exact label does not define these spaces or change their purpose. The first of the garden cemeteries we will look at is Père Lachaise. It was established by Napoleon in 1804 in Paris, France. The now 110-acre space is fully saturated with monuments. The most notable fact about Père Lachaise is that it is credited as the world's first garden cemetery. It is also the most visited cemetery in the world annually. Character-defining features of a garden cemetery are due to the planning and architectural design found within them. They may be referred to as landscaped cemeteries, meaning that their design and natural elements are intentional. What is interesting about garden cemeteries is that they are multifunctional because of their settings. Usually found within urban centers, they must act as a memorial ground and public park for the community. This sets Père Lachaise and our next spaces apart from traditional churchyard and small urban plots. They are heavily influenced by the English garden movement, which we had a little taste of in Unit 4 with Stowe Gardens. The elements seen there apply here as well. Garden cemeteries typically feature a walled or gated barrier, landscaped flora, paved pathways, and even urban furniture like lighting and benches. One can imagine the space as having a similar walled garden effect described by Boccaccio. It is a place of reflection to discuss life beyond ourselves. As you can see, the space mimics a smaller city-like landscape within the larger context of Paris. Markers and monuments line the path, simulating building fronts and a streetscape. The architectural styles seen here elevate the cemetery beyond typical markers seen in America. The next two cemeteries feature the same effect, but on a smaller scale to Père Lachaise. Here they are grand to represent the monetary and political power of some of Paris's best. Through architecture and planning, Père Lachaise set the standard for garden cemeteries and provides an example of how cemeteries can provide effective heterotopias for people to escape to. To better understand garden cemeteries as virtual environments, we must acknowledge their teleological qualities. For a space to be a teleological virtual environment, it must signify the process of ending or reaching a goal. As garden cemeteries provide a final resting place for some, they can also provide imagery about the end for those of us still interacting with the space. To discuss the use of symbology in different cemeteries, I'll be using both the Colonial Park and Laurel Grove cemeteries found in Savannah. These 18th and 19th century cemeteries bear hallmark qualities of the garden cemetery features perfected in Père Lachaise. Both include walled structures and pathways, as well as landscaped elements. The added importance of symbols used on the markers makes for lasting messages from the families interred. During the creation of both cemeteries, Colonial Park, predating Laurel Grove, symbology was a huge trend in memorial design and mourning culture. Adding images like clasped hands, books, crosses, and flowers was a way families could choose to remember that person by. The 18th century markers in Colonial Park Cemetery give us a good idea of the messages being left for the living. Now worn down due to weathering and damage, we can see symbols of skulls, urns, and oak trees. These symbols are reminders that life is fragile and finite. Along with the Alpha and Omega symbols on one of the tombs, most cemetery symbolism will suggest the cyclical nature of life and death. The grave markers in Laurel Grove are in a much better shape than the older colonial cemetery. Here we can see more specific symbols such as books, doves, memorials to tradesmen, wreaths, and drapery. Some of these symbols more directly linked to a person's occupation, such as the Woodsman of the World tree trunk markers. Others, such as wreaths, draped cloth, and lilies, symbolize the mourning and loss of innocence. Large figural pieces of children and angels also populate Laurel Grove. These figures act as guardians and can be powerful symbols bringing peace to those who have lost loved ones. The use of symbology in garden cemeteries can remind us of death as well as hope in a life without the people interred. The symbols create a teleological space in which we can all access these messages. Mixed with architectural and careful planning, symbology plays a key role in the overall experience of garden cemeteries as effective heterotopias. The last garden cemetery we are looking at is the Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, Georgia. The cemetery was Atlanta's public burial ground predating the Civil War and a major community icon, being one of the only unburnt features from Atlanta's youth. The cemetery sits in an elevated section of East Atlanta, overlooking the rest of the city. With all features of garden cemeteries discussed, Oakland is a wonderful example. However, this is where my interest in preservation comes into play with our course material. Although Oakland survived the burning of Atlanta, years of neglect and a tornado in 2008 nearly destroyed this space. Since then, the community, with local preservation groups, have brought Oakland back to the icon it was in its prime. Serving events and educational functions daily, the Atlanta Cemetery is a sought-out destination. This story isn't an isolated event, however. As mourning culture from the 18th and 19th centuries declined, so did the popularity of visiting cemeteries. What we can learn by studying heterotopias like garden cemeteries is how they really do adjust with time and culture. Foucault's theory supports this evolving of space as communities change, so should their designated spaces. Today, Oakland and each of the previously mentioned cemeteries are able to serve its main function as a resting place and still provide an escape from daily life to a purposefully designed architectural space. In conclusion, cemeteries provide everyday examples of virtual environments that have been used throughout human history. Looking at examples such as Père Lachaise, Savannah cemeteries, and Oakland, one can see that all elements are required for an effective experience. Architecture, planning, the use of symbology,